The smell arrived first. It always arrives first. It's not a smell that goes in through your nose. It's one that scrapes the back of your neck, that settles between your teeth like burnt metal dust, ozone, old iron, and something else that has no name in any catalog, something close to the scent of a star extinguished a million years ago. That night I recognized it before the breach did anything else, before the cold changed direction or the wood of the Alfar began to sing in the walls. I had carried that smell on my clothes for enough years to know what it meant. I stood still on the covered balcony with my cigarette halfway along its path, looking out toward Playa Chica. The blues on the radio had turned to static 10 minutes ago, which was another sign. Below, the stallion shone under the moon like a white metal animal that knows when to be ready. Julian appeared in the doorway without making a sound. For the new kid, he moved well. He learned quickly that in this house silence has layers, and that not all of them belong to the same side of things. I gestured for him to sit. I crushed the cigarette in the glass ashtray and lit another with the butt of the previous one. The glow illuminated my hands for a second. I looked at my left arm almost without meaning to, that old habit of checking that the damage is still there, that it wasn't a dream. The scar has a dark, glassy texture, older than the rest of my body. I got it in Nebraska. Winter of 2004. Look, I told him. Today the sea is more restless than usual. As if it were waiting for something to come down from the north. He didn't answer. He knows when to speak and when not to, which is one of the few things that matter. I leaned my back against the balcony railing and gave my account to the night, which is the only audience I have for this story. I was 24 years old and believed that numbers were sacred. Nebraska in winter is a total absence. A desert of dead cornfields under a concrete sky that stretches until the eye loses the thread. The fine dust gets into your pores and stays. You can't get it out even with soap. Silo 9 was buried 40 meters under the asphalt. No mystique, no glamour. Just the sterile cold of concrete and the flicker of yellowish sodium lights that gave the skin the color of a recent corpse. I worked with Hayes and Harris, two engineers with steady hands and eyes fixed on the oscilloscopes. Good men. The project was called Aegis. Shield, in the Pentagon's language. But the true objective aimed at the tear. What they called the zero-point impact. The idea was simple in its arrogance: fire a projectile that didn't travel through space but across it, appearing directly inside the target. We worked on the tuning system, on the capacitors that had to open the channel wide enough for the projectile to pass and close it before something else came through. Colonel Vance watched us from the upper catwalk as if we were lesser gods who hadn't yet proven anything. He didn't understand, none of us understood, that with each hum of the capacitor we were peeling back the world's rind. We had excessive confidence in metric precision. We believed that if you could measure something, you controlled it. First mistake. The second was assuming that on the other side lay an inert void. It's not a void. It's something that pushes back here with constant pressure, searching for any crack. We opened the hole for it with a military drill. The accident occurred on a Tuesday at 3 in the morning. There was no explosion. There were no sirens. The test projectile didn't travel, it remained suspended in the center of the lab, throbbing with an intensity that blurred the edges of the visible. In the center of the silo appeared a wound in space, a tear that devoured the surrounding light without returning it. Hayes was first. He stopped in his tracks. Rigid. He didn't scream. The only sound was the snapping of his sternum opening, and then the worst silence, the silence of something reorganizing itself according to a logic that wasn't biological. His lungs grew out through his ribcage like roots fracturing pavement. The flesh became architecture. Harris tried to help him. Fatal mistake. Upon contact, his fingers fused with Hayes's shoulder in an amalgam of black keratin. His eyes liquefied down his cheeks, sucked inward by reverse pressure. I was trapped on the other side of the armored glass, witness to a butchery that had no name in any discipline I had studied. As the cold of that edge, a cold with direction, with hunger, began to devour my left arm from the elbow to the shoulder. Seal it. Seal it now. On the other side, Vance's voice sounded without any fear. That was what froze the rest of me. Engineer Miller, maintain the vertical. What you classify as an accident marks Aegis's operational milestone. Secure the calculation disks and the chassis of prototype 01. This is policy now. That was when I understood. Hayes and Harris were fuel. The shrapnel from the shielding had ripped my left arm open from shoulder to elbow. I acted with the lucidity of someone who has already lost too much to waste time on fear. I sabotaged the generators. I erased the tuning sequences. I left through the ventilation ducts, crawling with one arm, leaving a dark trail on the metal grate. I didn't wait for the extraction team. I knew what Vance would do to someone who had seen what I saw. In a motel in Kansas, I cauterized my arm with what I had. I pulled out a fragment of mineral that had remained embedded in the wound, something hard and cold that glowed weakly in the dark of the bathroom. The engineer Frank Miller died in that room. The man who started the engine the next morning had no name or brand. I spent 6 months in a body and paint shop south of Missouri. I worked nights with the prototype 01 chassis on the welding table. The idea was simple: if the field that Silo 9 used to drill through space could be inverted, it could be used to contain it. Not open, seal. The first time I tested it in the shop's parking lot, at night, in January, the temperature dropped 4 degrees in a 3-meter radius. The field held for 16 seconds before the coils failed from overload. 16 seconds. It was enough to know the direction was correct. I called it a dissipator because that was what it did. It created nothing. It only dissipated what shouldn't be there. In Mexico I found what I was looking for in the encrypted records from Silo 9, the name of an Argentine journalist who had documented coastal anomalies in Patagonia since the 1930s. A coast of dense granite, high resistance to electromagnetic deformation. It wasn't mystical. It was engineering. I went to the place where the work was hardest for the other side. I sold the Chevy in Mexico. The next 4 months I spent on the road heading south, stopping at shops where cash work paid for fuel, and each stop gave me time to tune the device. I arrived in December, in the middle of the southern summer. The shard in my sternum, which since November 2004 had been pointing in directions that corresponded to no magnetic north, went quiet within the first 24 hours. I followed the trail of the coastal anomaly to the Alfar and settled in. The Alfar was a giant from the 1940s in the southern zone, one of those buildings someone built with an ambition the city never understood. I had set myself up in what was once the main dining room, a massive hall with large windows looking straight out at the breakers. I boarded up the openings with old wood and tarps. I slept with the device within arm's reach. The quiet nights were the worst. The only sound was the hum left over from Nebraska, that radio signal with no off switch. In the dark, the left arm glowed faintly, a glassy luminescence so slight it could have been imagination, except that imagination doesn't radiate cold. I kept a paper log, date, arm temperature, buzz intensity, with the discipline of someone who no longer trusts memory but still trusts numbers. The encounter occurred in mid-July, during one of the worst storms of that year. The wind hit the Alfar with a hiss that reminded me of the blow of the silo reactors. The battery radio cut out dead. In its place, a dull hum that shook my entire body. From the dining room ceiling, just above the rusted bronze chandelier, a stain began to seep. A black, thick pitch that dripped, defying gravity, and stretched into filaments that vibrated at the same rhythm as the silo crack. I called it the Void Weaver. When a drop touched the concrete floor, the floor crystallized in a second, expanding toward my boots. I tried to back away. Something in the air froze my leg muscles. The stain was already inches from my face, stretching a filament toward my eyes, when the dining room window shattered. The boss and the Mexican broke in, smashing the rotten wood structure. They carried copper induction coils and a magnetic containment cage. The boss didn't hesitate. She planted her heels on the slippery floor and activated the trap. The coils buzzed with an analog, dense crackle, releasing a discharge of electromagnetic static that bent the air and forced the Void Weaver to retreat to the ceiling beams with a dull shriek. The Mexican operated the dials of the console, adjusting the cage's magnetic field to force the confinement of the stain. Outside, the stallion waited with the engine running. That was how they found me. I fell silent. The blues had died out long ago. The only thing heard was the rumor of the sea, which at that hour sounds more like a roar than a caress. I crushed the last cigarette in the glass ashtray. I looked Julian up and down. I stopped for a second on his right arm, the one he has carried in a splint since the feria. To the naked eye it looks normal. But I know that stillness. Julian's arm weighs downward the same way mine weighs inward. The mineral announces itself before the flesh does. I rested my hand on his shoulder. Now you know where we come from, I said. I turned and went inside the house. I left him on the balcony.